Not a matter of if, but when crisis will rock your world. I'm Roshini Rajkumar, crisis strategist, licensed attorney, and host of The Crisis Files. In Season 3, we are giving special attention and shining the light on some high-profile events that evade rational solutions and infect many areas of the nation and the globe. Today, retired Admiral Adm Meier is back on the show for a crucial conversation. He is the former commander of Naval Air Force Atlantic. He was the first commanding officer of the USS Gerald R. Ford and has worked to create operational and safety programs to ensure aircraft readiness in the Navy. Since his retirement in late 2023, he's devoted much of his time to the mental health of military members and veterans. And sadly, a lot of focus has been on preventing suicide. He's here for the case file I call Military Minds. Admiral, if you believe in omens, 2025 really started with two blasts that were not lucky charms. What the New Orleans and Las Vegas New Year's Day incidents had in common, both suspects are or were members of the military. New Orleans was ruled a terrorist attack. In Las Vegas, Army Green Beret member Matthew Livelsberger was on approved leave when he drove an explosive-laden Tesla Cybertruck outside the Trump International Hotel in Vegas. He's reported to have died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He had been receiving mental health treatment for the previous year. Admiral Meier, though no one was murdered in Vegas, this incident really refocuses on the mental health of military members.
It does, Roshini, and thanks for having me back on your show. The only downside to being here is that we are talking about crisis and really the crisis of mental health again, in particular with our veterans and military members. The issue that happened in Las Vegas was tragic. It potentially could have been much worse, but I would tell you, in my opinion, that this reflects the pressure that continues to be on our military members. In this case, Matthew was an extremely well-trained Special Forces soldier. And it's also important to say that both these are still under investigation. And, there's a lot more work to be done there. But I think that in Matthew's case, this is perhaps another symbol of the pressure that our military faces and the pressure that puts on the individuals in that force. Last time I was here, we talked about the issue of suicide, in particular with veterans, meaning those that are no longer in the service. And that suicide rate is about twice what the national average is. But the rate for suicide amongst active duty members is also higher than average in our country as well.
Wow. And I think we sort of, I don't even know how we think about war anymore. I just know that my idea and understanding of war is so different from when I was a child or even in my early 20s, partly because I've been able to interview people like you and members of the armed forces in all of the different areas, land, sea, air. But really, life has changed. Our world has gotten more violent, the kinds of weaponry much more advanced. Can you give us more of a picture of what any military member is really dealing with on a day-to-day basis, especially if they are in one of these hot zones in the world?
Yeah, I think it's especially important for the folks that are deployed in hot zones. And at the outset, I think we have to recognize that our world seems to be a more dangerous place today than it has been at any time during my life. I just look at the violence and the hostility that's going on in Ukraine, the Middle East, potentially in the South China Sea, in Africa. It really is around the world. But what I think we're seeing is a fundamental change to the character of war. And as technology advances, we're seeing a lot of what I would call megatrends. Longer range fires, for one thing in particular. So if you just look at Israel, and this also applies to the bases that we have and the outposts that we have in Syria, but Israel's under attack from the north with missiles, from Hamas with short-range missiles. They've been attacked by Iran, and then they're attacked from the Houthis from the south. Hundreds, in some instances, thousands of mile ranges, and that's just missiles. And then there's UAVs. And then there's a constant threat of attack in the cyber world or technology online, which is a whole nother kind of attack. Normally we think of kinetic attacks where we blow things up and destroy things and kill people. But the online vector for this change in the character of war can have tremendous impacts to our infrastructure, but it also can get to, I think, maybe the issue that we had in New Orleans, where literally our force, our men and women are under attack from outside sources through online, really with organizations trying to radicalize them or co-opt them into their way of thinking.
Right. And I'm glad you brought up the whole New Orleans situation. So far, that has been ruled a terrorist attack, likely solo person not communicating with others, but who knows what else will come up. That self-radicalization with that internet pervasiveness, is this something that all zones in the military are really concerned about right now?
It is. I think it's something we really need to be aware of. And we need to be aware of it at a national level. It's a much larger issue than just the military. In this instance, it happens to be an individual that was formerly in the military. But I know that our national, local, state law enforcement agencies are very concerned about this issue in particular. And it's really hard to get after because you can really find anything you want on the internet. You can strike up relations with anybody. And in our country, we have this balance of personal freedoms and privacy, and then this other competing interest that may be the national interest. And sometimes those can get blurred or cross-threaded in there. So I'm not sure that we have our handles on this, but it is certainly a vector that adversaries, in particular Islamic radical entities, are targeting American citizens, without a doubt.
It seems that we've really grown in our awareness of the mental health issues that happen, not only nationwide and globally for civilians, but especially deep for members of the military. I have long thought that we as a country, the United States anyway, does not give enough support when service people come back and then go back into civilian life. But even when they're still serving, I mean, Matthew was a Green Beret. He was on leave. He was not a veteran. So what can you tell us about what's being done to support mental health challenges in the military? And I ask that knowing that there's probably still a stigma for members of the military to even admit they might have a mental health issue.
Yeah, there's an awful lot to unpack with the question that you just asked. First, I would say that at a national level, we see a rising trend of suicide in our country. Lots of theories about why that is. Perhaps some of the issues of cell phones being taken out of schools now, which has kind of become this awareness that cell phones, while good in many, many ways, also have a tendency to create this lack of connectedness where people are communicating through kind of an impersonal means, and that it may not be helpful. So that's an example. The other issue is that suicides have a lot of common threads, if you will. In my experience, unfortunately, many of them have relationship, personal or social related issues that might be causal factors, for example, or financial issues or career implications. And we'd be kidding ourselves if we said or thought that there were not barriers to coming forward. First and foremost, lack of access. Getting help is very, very difficult. In many instances, the wait is months, and our mental health personnel are really forced to do a kind of a triage type approach. In my position, I wasn't worried if somebody was really presenting as a threat to themselves or others. They always got head of the line privileges, and I think they got very good care. But folks that had maybe more routine issues with depression or mental health issues, or were just struggling, they often had much longer waits. On aircraft carriers, for example, we have psychologists that deploy on board those ships. So we have an organic psychology capability or psychological treatment and care capability on board. That's pretty unique compared to a lot of units. But I will tell you, in every ship that I've been on that had that, they were the hardest working people on the ship. Absolutely over-swamped with people needing help, wanting to talk, and they did tremendous good. I would tell you there wasn't enough of them. So if you look at the barriers to why people don't come forward, that's another, I think we have to look at that eyes wide open. Let's be very factual, in a male majority, kind of a macho kind of an environment. Certainly if you're in the special forces and some of the other more operationally focused units, there's an individual and personal reluctance to come forward just from personal pride or the notion that maybe somebody will call you weak, or that you'll feel weak, or that you'll let your teammates down. Because if you present with a mental health challenge and you get pulled off the line, so to speak, it doesn't mean that the unit's going to play a person down. It means somebody else is going to stand your watch, so to speak. So there's that pressure, and that's largely an internal pressure. I don't think that there's much in way of mocking people. There's probably some, but I think that that's an internally driven issue by the individual. So there's that aspect. We'd be lying as well if we said that there was potentially no impact to an individual's career, because there are some mental health conditions that simply are not conducive to being carrying weapons. And
I think that's not to insult someone if they have a mental health issue, but I think the millions of Americans that you as military personnel are protecting would agree that there are certain mental health conditions that would prevent you from being capable or being in a safe way to be able to operate and then possibly be in harm's way.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of those manifest later in life. So you could be perfectly healthy today, and then through a series of things, maybe it's traumatic brain injuries, or maybe it's post-traumatic stress disorder, or maybe it's the fact that you've been on this heightened sense of preparation and readiness for months, if not years. And all of that kind of takes a toll, and it might be enough to might give a psychotic break, is what a psychologist might call that. But something like that might make a person, no longer eligible, at least in that role of the military. And it's important that we have an aggressive, a ready, fully capable forward deployed military. I think our military does amazing work. It's also amazingly important that our commanders in particular, but our peers, are looking out for each other, that we're doing everything we can to increase that mental health capacity, that we're doing everything we can to prevent issues before they become issues. And I think that gets to part of your question too, was the care that we provide for folks when they come back from a deployment, when they come off that heightened state of preparation, or maybe they come out of a combat theater. I would tell you there's some of that, but I don't think there's enough.
Right. And I can imagine that there's not enough. I mean, across many countries, mental health professionals are definitely in short supply, and that immediate need or that urgency for members of the military, especially active duty, to get that is so important. And then on the flip side, for veterans, when they do come back from their lives of service, to get back into civilian, that I've talked with you about this. I've talked with former Army generals about this, retired Army generals, and it's not the same kind of life. Civilian life is very different. From what you've seen so far, and now, you're going on 18 months of retirement and working on these issues even more deeply compared with when you were in full service in the Navy. What have you learned, and what do you think we should know in the outside non-military world about the mental health, both during service and then the post-service timeframes?
Fantastic question. And I would tell you that I think this really kind of touches to one of the greatest challenges that we have, maybe you and I have, in understanding this space. I've been married for a long time. I come from a stable family, and my parents' family was stable. I have 2 healthy kids that are serving in the military today. We're financially stable as well. So point is, we're in a really good place. But as a recently retired member of the military and now a veteran, I would absolutely tell you there are elements of that I miss, without a doubt. And I don't think that's a symbol of weakness. I don't think that's anything other acknowledgement that that's where my peer group was. That's where my friends were. I thrived in the challenges and the problems, if you will, that we had.
You loved what you were doing.
I absolutely did. I loved what I was doing, and I loved the people that I was doing it with, and I missed the engagements with them. I miss the, being in a position where my position, retiring at 38 years and a reasonably successful career, I was frequently the decision maker or the one that was really kind of the bottom line for fixing and solving problems. And I loved that. And there's nothing like empowering people to get the job done and then kind of standing back and watching them carry out commander's intent. Enormously rewarding. That's my perspective. So and if I miss it at that level, I have absolutely no doubt that any military member, once they leave, they miss their friends. They miss the mission. They miss looking to the left and the right and relying on people like most people can probably never fully understand. If you're an aviator or if you're working in a complex engineering department or if you're a Green Beret, I mean, there's a sense of camaraderie amongst those folks that goes, I think, much deeper than anything you're going to find in the civilian sector.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I'm sure many people listening and watching this could relate to retirement, missing that world, or even changing careers, missing their former. But there is really a depth in military service that most of us will never fully understand. And I totally respect that. And I'm grateful because it's certainly something I couldn't do. I was joking with my husband the other day. We were watching a show and it was about, it's a newish show about police officers on Netflix on Prime. And she was talking with her recruit and he didn't know where he was in that moment. And she said, at all times, you need to know exactly where you are. You need to be able to name the cross streets and blah, blah, blah. And it's sort of a family joke. I have no sense of direction. So I said to my husband, well, there alone is why I cannot be a police officer. I have no sense of direction whenever. I would never help anybody in that situation. But what you point out is so true in that and a lot of workplace psychologists and others talk about the sense of purpose. And what you described was this deep purpose that you had every day on your ship or leading your people. And I can see how when a member of the military leaves that day to day, they could be lost because that sense of purpose is so very different. And then they have to find it. First of all, it's different. It's going to be different in civilian life. And then they have to find it.
Yeah, I've come to that realization that I'm not going to find anything like that again. And it was amazing. And I lived a blessed life. I was really honored to be able to serve our country for 38 years. It was really an incredible privilege. But there's lots of other things that we're doing together as a family or that I'm doing professionally that are also incredibly rewarding. But what this really gets to me, Roshini, is not the crisis discussion, after a tragic event like Matthew's suicide happens, but really, how do we get left of bang, as the Army would say, left of bang, before the explosion or the kinetics happen? And this is where we can really, really make a difference. I think it certainly starts at the individual level. You and I know people and have friends and have probably at some point in our life had friends that seemed to get depressed or struggled with setbacks in their life. And when that happens, I think people are amazing. They'll kind of drop what they're doing. They'll do everything they can to help people, but you got to know about it. And in the military, I think it's incumbent upon commanders and supervisors to do everything they can to know their people as well as they can. When I flew aircraft for the Navy, we would have what we called human factors boards or human factors councils, which might sound a little catty on the surface how the execution of it was, but we literally would at a mid-grade level sit around and talk about individuals in the squadron, in the aviators. Now, there's moves to do this at other levels. The Marine Corps does this extremely well, really very deep into their organization. But this notion of how is Lieutenant Jones' family? Is their marriage doing good? Are they performing? Are they progressing professionally? So there's this discussion of the professional side, but there's also a discussion of all those other things, those human factors in our lives that can either contribute or degrade from our performance in the unit.
Well, I think that's a great lesson for civilians because in my world of corporate executive coaching, they do regular talent assessments. Most of the time, though, those leaders sit around and talk about the direct reports on purely professional
Right.
development. I think they kind of, for HR law reasons, are in a way shielded from talking about family, marriage, kids of that particular employee. But maybe we could all take a lesson from how you do this here in parts of the military in asking about those things because they do matter. No one's living in a vacuum.
Right. And we actually went so far as to have a formula for things that would effectively a stress formula. And if you're overly stressed flying multi-million-dollar aircraft with people and the responsibility that comes with that, maybe you shouldn't be flying. And there were times when we would take people off the flight schedule or set them down if they were having either traumatic events in their life or significant events in their life, like getting married in a different location and all the happiness, but also the stress that all comes with that. Probably you don't want to be flying the most challenging training events immediately before that. I mean, some of that's just common sense. And it was always done professionally to ensure that we were as safe as we could be with the things that we knew. So this leads to another question. And that's kind of what can we do? And this gets into, the limited access was without a doubt a barrier. So would we like to provide more care for folks when they return from deployment? I have every confidence that we would like to, not just post-deployment, but on the way to deployment as we're ramping up to help to build up mental toughness and those those coping mechanisms. We can do a lot better in this space. And there are commercial entities out there that we can contract with. We typically kind of focus more on the physical side of things because that's so easy to see. If somebody has a problem with their neck or a broken bone or some sort of a physical injury, very easy to see, very easy to treat. The mental issues are much harder to detect, and they're I don't necessarily say they're harder to treat, but you got to detect them first.
And
go ahead.
I was just going to say, you remind me by what you said of this is a perfect area for military and private enterprise or public corporations, but really the private sector to collaborate with the military to not only come up with solutions that are better for the military and military members, but perhaps could go to other civilians when it comes to these mental health issues.
Absolutely. The ability for the Navy, for example, or really DoD Health Services to onboard mental health professionals. It's a very competitive environment for that skill set. The pay may or may not be competitive with some of the higher pays out there. I would argue the job satisfaction would be significant. But there are, like I said, there's civilian entities, and we started using some of this while I was at Airland, more on the physical side, but the same group that we used to that end also has the ability to pull in mental health personnel to really treat how we handled things more like a sporting event on the physical and the psychological aspect. So if I went on a flight before we started working with O2X, and this is the name of the organization, before we started working with them, we really would just kind of go for the flight. And they kind of started treating it like a sporting event where you would actually stretch, you would physically prepare yourself, because when you fly in a high G environment or vibrations or a threat environment, getting physically ready beforehand is important. I mean, you would never step into an athletic event without stretching and preparing. And then the other side of this, which is a completely untapped resource, is the mental side of this, the mental toughness of whether that's a sporting event or a physical competition. That's an untapped reservoir right now.
Absolutely. Well, I'm really pleased to hear that you've had some success in the Navy with working with some of the private entities and you're expanding that. I'd like to think other branches of the military are doing the same. What do you hope the civilians out there that hear our conversation, what can we take? Because I think there are still some misunderstood narratives about military life, about active service members as well as veterans. I think we've gotten better in treatment of our veterans, but I don't think we've really gotten to that 10 and that gold standard yet.
Yeah, I think we're certainly making progress in this space, without a doubt. A couple big epiphanies that I had, I think. One is that if you talk to pretty much any CEO level or any corporate level or any supervisor, and you ask them what's the most important aspect of their organization, they're going to say their people, almost universally. And I think sometimes we pay a little bit of lip service to that, because if our people are in fact our most precious resource, we invest in them more. We would invest in these intangibles, in the checkups on how they're doing. We'd provide more types of things, not just for the physical health and well-being, but for the mental health and well-being as well. So we can really kind of get at that capacity piece. And what most people want, I think what everybody wants is they kind of want to be part of an organization where they know that the organization cares about them and that they feel like they're a contributing member to that organization. So how well we make the team, how we build that team, how we demonstrate that our people are our most precious resource and we truly care about them, the companies that do the best in that space have the least turnover and the highest performance and the highest efficiency in a company. Now, there's a million ways you can skin that cat, but what I'm talking about, this isn't rocket science. It's really commitment to your organization and to your people, but not just by words, but truly by actions. And I think that they'll resonate across the board.
I absolutely agree. Well, as always, Admiral John Meier, you help demystify topics for us and challenge us to look beyond and really get to the next level. So we appreciate your time. You can always check out our previous discussion with Admiral Meier, case file number 74, Suicide, What Did I Miss, from season 2. And that was also another terrific conversation, which challenges us on many levels. Thanks so much. And we wish you such good luck and great vibes in your continued commitment to the people of the nation and the world as you try to prevent suicides as well as really bolster the mental health of our military.
Well, thank you, Roshini. As I said at the outset, it's great to be back on the Crisis Files, and thanks for the opportunity to cover such an important topic.
It's absolutely our pleasure. Today's case file is powered by Huntington. Huntington, home of early pay. You could get paid up to 2 days faster, and there's no cost. It's your money, so stop playing the waiting game. Find out more at huntington.com/yourmoney. Direct deposit and eligibility requirements apply. Follow the show on YouTube and Instagram at The Crisis Files. Rate, review, and subscribe to The Crisis Files on your platform of choice. Check out our website, thecrisisfiles.com, to catch up on all case files and to share ideas for future case files. I'm Roshini Rajkumar. Join me next time on The Crisis Files.